Well, hello. I am sorry this is getting put up so late. It's just been kind of a weird day. I know I've heard from a lot of you that you're really enjoying the fact that sometimes you can watch church on Saturday. And I don't know if it's because you think you don't have to get up on Sunday morning then or what. I'm not sure what that's about, but it's almost midnight and I'm finally getting this done. I hope that you are surviving well. It was a delight today to go visit some of our members of our congregation, even though I had my mask on, they had their mask on, we had to stand 6 feet apart, just got to kind of stand out on the stoop and visit a little bit, but it was just good to see some of you. And I miss you all so much. And that was the one thing we all keep saying is, we can't wait until we can be back in the church. We can't wait until we can be back to fellowship and singing and hugging each other and even just shaking hands. It will come. It's not going to be terribly soon. I wish we could do it safely now, but we can't. And so I'm going to ask you to be patient. I put a letter out about it that I keep trying to wrap my head around the idea of being in church and everybody just coming in, walking in, sitting a pew apart, families here 6 feet, families there. I don't even know how for sure we would do communion, and then to be done and just have to walk out the door and no fellowship and no coffee and no cookies and I can't quite wrap my head around that yet. So we're gonna wait and we're gonna make sure everybody's safe when we do finally get back together. May have noticed a little bit of a change up in the background here. I kind of got tired of that red. It seemed a little harsh. You may also notice a difference in the sound. Got ready to record this, as I said, it's almost midnight, and realized that the professional grade microphone that I usually use is in my office at South Lake. So hope this comes out okay. Let us have a little time of prayer together. Oh, Lord, nice deep breath, just sinking into you and feeling your presence with us. It feels good to know that we, in one way or another, are learning together, praising together, praying together. But we do pray that this will end soon. I do thank you so much, Lord, for your protection. So far, have not heard of anyone within our congregation that has tested positive for COVID-19. And for that, we are thankful. I just thank you for, like I said, your protection, your love, and the fact that you stay with us. There's nothing we can do to make you love us less. And that feels really good right now. Lord, be with us now as we look back at Nehemiah and see what we can learn from him. Thank you, Lord, for always being by our side. In Jesus' holy name, amen. It has been a while since we've been in the book of Nehemiah. I think it's been 2 or 3 years since we've looked at that book. And it's one of those, it's a fairly short book in the Old Testament. You could probably sit down and read it in an hour or less. But there is so much packed in there. And I remember the first time I really studied Nehemiah was during one of my master's classes on leadership. Because there's so much of leadership in there. And Nehemiah kept kind of calling to me again this week. And I thought, well, I didn't want to go back to the leadership part of it. I thought, Lord, why are you pointing me towards Nehemiah? But then I started looking at Nehemiah from the aspect of prayer. I had kind of forgotten the power of prayer in Nehemiah. So we are going to look at Nehemiah from the aspect of his prayer life today, because there's much to be learned there. Now, I'm going to warn you, I got 7 pages. Probably not going to read the whole thing. Some of the prayers are pretty long, so I'm going to try and summarize them really quickly for you. I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but anyway, Nehemiah. So who was he? First of all, his name in Hebrew actually meant Yahweh has comforted. I love that. I just learned that today. Yahweh has comforted. And Nehemiah became quite a comfort to the people that he helped. His whole story offers comfort, guidance that we can use in everyday life. And in the text, it states that he was the cupbearer to King Artaxerxes. That might not sound like a really big job, but he was basically a bodyguard. He did test the wine, the food, anything that was brought to the king to be consumed. He tested it to make sure it was safe. So he spent a lot of time around the king. He had a very personal relationship with him. And that becomes very obvious in chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. The king notices that Nehemiah looks sad. Now, you have to be around somebody quite a bit to know when they look sad. And the fact that he acknowledged that he looked sad, I love that. It means he meant much more to this king than just being a servant. The king was concerned that he was sad. So Nehemiah holds a pretty good place in the king's court. The story of Nehemiah is about the wall around Jerusalem. And we're going to get into that a little deeper here in just a moment. But that is the entire story, is that he is trying to rebuild the wall around Jerusalem. So, through the process of restoring and dedicating that wall, there are lessons on prayer, leadership, overcoming enemies, restoring hearts, integrity, and holiness. For today, we're going to concentrate on his prayer life. In the 13 chapters of this book, there are 14 prayers. We're just going to concentrate, we're going to focus on just a few of them today. The first prayer in the book occurs in chapter 1, verses 4 through 11. Nehemiah, some old friends of his show up, and he asks them about Jerusalem. Since the exile, 2 groups have returned, and the temple has been rebuilt. But these friends tell him, Nehemiah, it's so sad. The wall is still in the shambles. It's been burnt at the gates. There's no protection there. And Nehemiah is just so saddened by this. Everything's in horrible shape. Now, if a bad wall doesn't sound important to you, let me give you a comparison. It would be like you not having any locks on your doors, no electricity, no police force, no phones. That's how important the wall is back then. They were defenseless, they were vulnerable. It created a lot of anxiety, really, to not have that wall. But it was really about more than just protecting them. It was about their faith, it was about their heritage, it was about their dignity. But mostly it was about their faith. After having suffered so much in being exiled and sold into slavery, Nehemiah knew that God wanted them protected. And God put it on Nehemiah's heart that this was what he was to do, was to go rebuild the wall. So, his reaction when he hears this, verse 1:4 states that he sat down and wept when he heard about it. Then he spent several days mourning and fasting and praying. Let's face it, he could have very easily stayed there. He could have just kept mourning and fasting and praying that somebody else would fix it. But that was not Nehemiah. Nehemiah decided that he was the one, and God really laid it on his heart. Nehemiah, I'm going to be with you. This is your job. Go fix my wall. So, here is his first prayer in the book. It says, when I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven, and then I said, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly toward you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws that you gave your servant Moses. Remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then, even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. They are your servants and your people whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant, and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. This man that he's speaking of is the king that he is cupbearer to. He's about to meet with him, and he's going to ask him a huge favor. As he's speaking with the king, we encounter his second prayer. Now, that first prayer was pretty intense, pretty deep, long. But his second prayer, the king asks him, what is it you want? Then I prayed to the God of heaven. That's all it says. Then I prayed to the God of heaven. Nothing long and fancy, or even out loud, because the next words are, and I answered the king. So that entire line is, then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king. This was what I refer to as a breath prayer. It's a prayer that can be said in one breath, and it is said quickly, succinctly, but very heartfelt. His prayer is answered. The king gives him everything he needs to accomplish the task. He gives him time off, money, letters to get him supplies and safe passage, and even sends army officers and cavalry with him. So his king cared very much about him, and he could see how much the wall meant to him, that this needed to be repaired. So he took care of him. The next prayer comes when the work has begun on the wall. I'm going to give you a little background so that you'll understand what's going on. A couple 3 weeks ago, I spoke about the Samaritans and where they came from and who they were, because we had two different instances of Samaritan people in the Bible. One was the woman at the well, and the other one was the Good Samaritan. And so we kind of went through that, but I want to give you a brief recap on that so you'll understand. We had talked about the Samaritans and that there was bad blood between them and the Jewish people. And this is where the Samaritans came from, is this time where he's going back to build the wall. 300 years before Nehemiah's time, northern kingdom of Israel was conquered, and most of the people were carried away captive. The area was repopulated with captives from other lands. The captives eventually intermarried with the few Israelites who had remained, and this created the mixed race known as Samaritans. They were looked down upon by the Jewish people because they were seen as impure. So when the Jewish people started returning to Jerusalem, those who were now in charge were feeling very threatened. They had a pretty good life going. And now that the Jewish people were coming back, they felt they could lose all of their power. And now Nehemiah comes along and he's rebuilding the wall, something they hadn't bothered with. And it's going to show him to be a great leader, and it's going to endear him to the people. And that is threatening. I mean, that's a big ouch. They could see everything slipping away. So they started taunting those who were trying to rebuild the wall. They started taunting them. They started telling them it would never be accomplished. And so Nehemiah, once again, turns to God for a quick heart-to-heart. This is in Nehemiah 4:4-5. Hear us, our God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders. I want you to notice he's not praying for revenge. What he's praying for here is that God's justice will be carried out. So he's not praying for revenge for himself. He knows that what he is doing is within God's will. And so he's just simply praying for God's justice. By the time we get to the 6th chapter, Nehemiah has faced more than enough opposition to make most men give up and walk away. He's organized and he has reorganized. He's had to make workers into soldiers to protect what they had accomplished. He's endured ridicule and rumor, but he keeps going back to the one place that he can find guidance and strength, and that is in his God. Nehemiah 6:9. They were all trying to frighten us, thinking their hands will get too weak for the work, and it will not be completed. That's what the enemies were trying to do, was make them feel too weak to complete it. But I prayed, now strengthen my hands. Again, another breath prayer. Nehemiah has a great prayer life, but that does not mean his prayers are long and complicated. A lot of them are just quick breath prayers. Now strengthen my hands. And the work continued. In Nehemiah 9:5-38, this is 5-38. Did you hear that? 5-38. That's a long prayer. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. But it is a blueprint for our own prayer life. This is not a prayer that Nehemiah said in a closed room. This is not a prayer that was just between he and God. This was a prayer out loud with those around him who have been working on the wall. And this is them rededicating themselves. He reminded them of where they have been, where they are now, and praying for where they need to be, praying for resolution, praying for the wall to be finished, praying for Jerusalem to be Jerusalem once again. It begins with praise and thanksgiving, but much of it is a recounting of Jewish history. And you will find that a lot of times in the Bible, simply the reason for it is simply that they didn't all have a Bible. So they would recount their history to make sure that everyone was remembering what had happened, what they had done, and what God had done. So it starts off with that, praise and thanksgiving, recounting Jewish history. He starts out with Abraham and the blessing given to him, the freeing of the slaves in Egypt, the giving of the Ten Commandments, and a recounting of God's compassion when his people lost their way spiritually in the desert and so wandered for 40 years. He admits their errors and their sins. He admits their errors and their sins. This is a very important part of our prayer life. It's got to be. If we are not admitting our errors and our sins, why would he listen to us? We have to remember to confess. But he also remembers that throughout all this time, God never turned his back on them, even though they turned their back on him several times. When they were out in the desert, he kept them fed. He kept them clothed. In those 40 years, their clothes never wore out. The shoes they were wearing at the end of it, the shoes that they were wearing at the beginning. He fed them. He kept them clothed. He kept them safe. All this after they had pretty much thumbed their noses at what he had done for them. He recounts all the times that God has offered blessing and his people have rebelled. But then in verse 33, he says, in all that has happened to us, you have remained righteous. You have acted faithfully while we acted wickedly. He then tells God that all those now in Jerusalem who have worked so hard to rebuild the temple and now the wall are committing themselves to follow him and him only, to worship him and to obey his laws. I really invite you to read Nehemiah in its entirety. Like I said, it's not a long book. There's 14 chapters. But I would invite you to really read it in its entirety because it is a great story. It's a great story of leadership. It's a great story of faith. It is just an amazing story, and I kind of forget sometimes how amazing that one book of the Bible really is. So I was glad that God led me back to it to this week to go through it again. You need to read it to see that God remains faithful even when we stray, and that we can rededicate ourselves to him and start over, and that his love never fails. Sometimes I talk to people who they were raised in the church, but they've wandered off. And they really have this sense that God is not going to want to hear from them. That God is probably mad at them. That they have done so much wrong that they cannot be forgiven. That they are lost forever. And I find that so sad. This book will show them, no, that's not the case. You can always come back. You can always rededicate yourself. So, that is Nehemiah 9, 5 through 38. Now, here's what I find to be perhaps the most amazing part of this story. If you're thinking that this was a small task to build this wall, let me set the record straight. The wall around Jerusalem is 2.5 miles long and 40 feet high. That's a big wall. And under Nehemiah's leadership, and with God's guidance and blessing, the wall was completed in 52 days. 52 days. That's amazing. I mean, just let that sink in for a minute. No large equipment, no trucks, no backhoes, no steel framing, no hoisting equipment, just stone and wood and the basic tools of hammers and chisels and mortar. And this wall truly was almost non-existent. There's 7 gates, and they had all been burned down. So they had to have the timbers to rebuild the gates. And they did it in 52 days. I mean, how long has I-29 and Highway 77 been under construction? I mean, that's kind of, sorry, but those are always under construction. 52 days, they had this wall done. That's just amazing. Nehemiah never relied on himself to get this project done. He always went to God with every decision, with every problem, with every need. He always went back to God. He also, though, always went to him with thanksgiving and prayer and confession. He made himself nothing so that God could do great things through him. I really do hope you take the time to read through Nehemiah. His prayer life, like I said, that's just one aspect of the book, but it's a great aspect. There's so much to learn from him in the areas of leadership and integrity and humility. This is just an excellent lesson to be learned, and it's one to go back to often. When we look at our own prayer life and we after reading about Nehemiah, we need to remember that while our breath prayers are more than welcome by God. He's happy to get those. But those deep prayers, like the one I didn't read to you, that was like 38 verses long, that we need to take the time to come to him with praise and thanksgiving first, confession second, and then let our needs be known. I think we kind of get those steps confused sometimes. We forget that we need to do the first 2 before we do the third one. To come to him and say, Lord, thank you so much. Thank you for, and list off the blessings. If you're having trouble right now finding your blessings, I think I suggested to you a couple weeks ago, start doing some journaling, or just throw a piece of paper up on the refrigerator and put a pen near it, and every time you think of something that is a blessing, write it down. You'll be amazed at how quickly they'll start to come. But to always come to him and thank him for all the blessings in your life. And then to come to him and say, Lord, I've messed up, and here's what I've done, and I am so sorry for it. And then to ask for forgiveness for the sins that you don't even realize that you have committed. We probably have more of those than the ones that we do know about, if we're real honest with ourselves. But to come to him with thanksgiving, with a contrite heart, with confession, and then to let him know what your needs are. These are the things that we need to do. I think we forget sometimes that God really, really wants to direct our steps. He wants that so bad. 23rd Psalm, you lead me in paths of righteousness for your name's sake. But we have to allow ourselves to be led. We have to not resist that. And it's very easy to resist being led because we try to lean on our own understanding, on our own power, on our own strength, on our own knowledge. And we miss out on so much when we do that. So, I pray that you will take a good hard look at your prayer life. Mine goes up and down. There are days when I feel like that's all I've done is pray. That I have prayed from the moment my eyes opened until I closed them that night. And there are other days that I suddenly realize I get to bed and I think, Lord, have I even talked to you today? And I get great guilt about it. But I also know that he's okay because I have come to him. He would love to have those days every day where I pray all day long, but they don't always happen. Look at your prayer life and look at your blessings. Please look at your blessings. Find the joy. Document the joy so that you can go back later and enjoy it again. Let's have a closing prayer. Lord, your blessings are many. And sometimes our prayers are too few. But we are so content in the fact that you're always waiting for us to just come have a conversation, to come to you and share with you our feelings, our struggles. That even though you already know everything we're going through, everything we've gone through, everything we need, and everything we want, you still need to hear from us. You still want that intimacy of those conversations. Help us to look at them that way. Help us to see prayer as an intimate conversation with the one who created us, the one who loves us no matter what, the one who will never turn his back on us. Lord, thank you for your grace and your mercy. Help us grow in our faith. In Jesus' holy name, amen. I pray the rest of this week is good for you. I pray that, I guess I keep telling you this, I just keep praying for your joy, that you can find joy in the day, that you can find a reason to laugh. Stay away from things that are going to harm your mental wealth and health, and lean into those things that make you laugh. Watch funny movies. I don't care if you've watched Big Bang Theory 40 times. If it makes you laugh, watch it again. Watch The Three Stooges, whatever. But find ways to laugh. And stay inside and stay in his word. How's that sound? That might be our new logo. I love you all. I miss you all so much. And we'll be back together again one of these days. But until then, I will see you here. I love you all.